Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are thrilled to have you with us again. Before we even get into today's material, I need you to do something for me right now. Smash that like button and hit subscribe wherever you are listening.
Yeah, it really helps us out.
Right. It tells the algorithm that you want more of these in-depth analyses. If you value raw breakdowns of the ideas shaping our world, you really need to support the show. Do it right now.
It is the digital equivalent of holding the line.
Exactly. So today we are diving into a text that is, it's making massive waves right now, especially among men's rights activists and the broader manosphere.
Massive ways. It is highly controversial.
It really is. The book is an ebook called Thousand Year Island Story, Insular Britain's Genetic, Cultural, and Spiritual Integrity, and it is written by Conrad Riker. Now, I want to state clearly right at the top for you listening at home, our mission today is just to impartially unpack the history and the arguments presented in this book.
Right. We are strictly analyzing the text. The book gets very politically charged, touching on both left-wing and right-wing themes, but we are not taking sides here.
Not at all. We are not endorsing Riker's viewpoints. We are just attempting to convey the ideas contained in the original source material. We know a lot of you listening follow these topics closely, so we want to break down exactly what Riker is arguing about the history of our institutions before they were quote-unquote captured.
And if you want to read the source material for yourself, you should check out Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now to buy Thousand Year Island Story.
Yes, go buy it so you can follow along. And Riker also has a Substack. You can follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for some of the uncensored thoughts that didn't make it into the final book.
So to set the stage here, Riker opens this book with a preface that basically acts as a filter. He describes the book as a summons.
A summons, it's a heavy word.
It is. He says explicitly that he didn't write this for what he calls woman pleasers or men who have outsourced their moral compass to HR departments.
He is deliberately filtering out a specific type of reader right at the gate.
Yeah, from his perspective, this book is a manifesto for men who value order, lineage, and truth over sentiment. He argues that the institutions of the English-speaking world, which used to be the envy of the globe, have been captured.
Captured implies a deliberate action. Captured by what exactly?
Well, Riker's core premise is that these institutions have been hollowed out by a mix of feminist, Marxist, and bureaucratic ideologies.
So our mission for this deep dive is to map out the history of this institutional capture as Riker sees it. We're going to look at his concept of the crisis of male biology, and finally his roadmap for a 1,000-year revival.
Let's start with Section 1. Riker lays out a foundation he calls blood, soil, and organic law.
Now, obviously, blood and soil is a phrase with a lot of historical baggage.
It definitely is, and he tackles that head on. He isn't using it as a slogan for hate, but rather to describe his view of the biological reality of governance. He argues that we have been tricked into thinking a nation is just a marketplace.
Or a hotel. I found that metaphor really striking.
The hotel nation, yeah.
Where you just check in, pay your taxes, follow the house rules, and check out. It's purely transactional.
Right. But Riker's thesis is that a nation isn't a hotel. He asserts it is a living body built on blood and soil. To prove this, he uses a historical contrast. He looks at the Roman withdrawal from Britain in 410 AD.
Which is fascinating because we generally tend to fetishize Rome as the ultimate civilization.
We do. We look at the aqueducts and the roads and think the Britons must have been devastated when the legions left. But Riker points out that when Rome withdrew the native end, Britons didn't keep the Roman system going.
They didn't maintain the Senate or the administrative zone.
No, they reverted almost instantly to tribal kingship. And Riker argues this happened because Rome was essentially a costume. An external imposition. It was never truly internalized by the people. The institutions didn't flow organically from the native population.
So his takeaway is that governance must flow from within to be legitimate.
Exactly. He contrasts the Roman costume with King Edwin of Northumbria's conversion to Christianity later on.
Because King Edwin actually chose it internally for his people.
Right. It was an internal choice by the leadership rather than an external imposition. Riker compares this dynamic to modern woke ideology, which he claims is being externally imposed by bureaucrats in Brussels or New York.
He says you cannot import legitimacy.
Right. And speaking of things that get pushed aside for these imported ideologies, Riker goes into what he calls the erasure of origins. He focuses heavily on Alfred the Great.
This part blew my mind. He cites a 2021 Department for Education review.
It is 0% stat.
Yes, literally 0% coverage of Alfred the Great in GCSE history materials.
It is a staggering detail.
I mean, this is the founder of the nation. He established English common law and literacy. He fought off the Vikings, and yet he is completely absent.
Riker contrasts this with the BBC's 2015 series on the Plantagenets. They got massive coverage while Alfred gets ignored. And Riker's argument is that Alfred is removed because he represents continuity, sovereignty, and cultural confidence.
Things the current system supposedly fears.
According to the book, yes. Riker links this to Plato's concept of the orphan state.
Explain that for the listener.
Plato described an orphan state as one where the guardians, the ruling class basically, have no blood stake in the future. They are disconnected from their lineage. Riker maps this directly onto the modern civil service and the elite.
He describes them as childless mobile and viewing tradition as mere superstition.
Right, they don't see themselves as stewards handing a legacy down. They're just managing a bureaucratic zone.
Which brings us perfectly into Section 2. Riker details how these elites actually took over in a chapter called The Capture of Institutions, or as he refers to it, the cathedral.
The cathedral is a term he borrows from other thinkers in this space. It refers to a decentralized secular church with its own strict dogma.
Like the media, academia, and the bureaucracy all operating with the same progressive religion.
Exactly. And Riker traces a big part of this capture back to the Education Reform Act of 1988.
Because that was the pivot toward child-centered learning.
Which sounds completely harmless.
Yeah. It sounds compassionate.
But Riker argues that, in practice, it replaced discipline with therapy. He shares a specific anecdote about a teacher in Stoke.
Right, the swearing incident.
Yeah, the teacher told Riker they couldn't punish a student for swearing or acting out because the new mandate was to understand the trauma behind the behavior.
And Riker's interpretation of that trauma is totally different. He says it's not a medical condition, it's just a, quote, dad-shaped hole.
He argues the system is trying to fill the void left by absent fathers with emotional worksheets instead of actual boundaries. And he says this mindset isn't just in schools, it has completely captured the media.
He brings some serious data to back that up regarding the BBC.
The bubble. He cites that 93% of senior editorial staff at the BBC voted Remain.
93% is wild. It shows a massive disconnect from the general public.
Riker calls this elite bubble, Londonistan. He describes them as living in a world where diversity is a religion and borders are seen as something only peasants care about.
While they themselves live in segregated wealth.
Exactly. They are totally insulated from the consequences of their own policies.
Which leads to his next point, the betrayal of the working class. He paints this really vivid picture contrasting the metropolitan class with the working man.
The banker in the glass tower at Canary Wharf versus the factory worker in Stoke-on-Trent.
It perfectly illustrates the divide. And Riker is highly critical of David Cameron's big society policy from the early 2010s.
He calls it a spiritual placebo.
Because while the government was preaching about community stepping up, they simultaneously slashed £37 billion from local councils.
Which resulted in the closure of the physical spaces where men gathered. The youth centers the local libraries, and most importantly, the pubs.
The pubs were the anchor of male community.
From Riker's perspective, yes. When you destroy those spaces, you destroy the social fabric for working class men.
And that ties directly into Section 3, which might be the most intense part of the deep dive. He calls it the crisis of male biology and psychology.
This is where he discusses the war on boys.
The statistics he uses here are alarming. He cites NHS data showing that over 12% of British boys under 16 are currently on behavioral medication.
Up from just 1% in 1950.
He argues you cannot explain a jump that massive with just better diagnostic criteria.
Right. Riker claims this is the pathologizing of masculinity. He asserts that a gynocentric school system is treating natural male traits like motion, risk-taking, and aggression as diseases that need to be cured.
He gives that anecdote about the boy named Oliver to illustrate this.
Yes, Oliver is a young boy who climbed the school flagpole.
A pretty standard boyish thing to do.
Exactly. Riker notes that Oliver's father, who is a Royal Marine, saw a boy pushing his boundaries and testing his courage. But the school saw a psychiatric problem. They labeled him and medicated him.
They medicated a kid for climbing.
Because the system cannot handle male energy. Riker says this creates what he calls a sacred vacuum.
Meaning a spiritual void.
Yes. A void left by the simultaneous decline of religion and fatherhood. And nature abhors a vacuum. Riker tells a story about a student who openly claimed his identity was assigned by TikTok.
Because he rejects biological roles, so he turns to a social media algorithm to tell him who he is.
It is the ultimate retreat to the digital. Riker argues that because society offers young men no rank and no honor in the real world, they retreat into video games and pornography.
He notes that the male attention span has dropped to 8 seconds.
And he brings up the neat demographic, not in education, employment, or training. He cites that they spend 4.7 hours a day on screens.
Roker has a brutal quote here. He says, "No one builds a legacy in Fortnite. This isn't leisure, it's anesthesia."
They are numbing themselves, and for many, even the anesthesia fails. We have to address his points on suicide and isolation.
It is the leading killer of men under 45.
Riker calls this the male peer support deficit. He connects it back to the closure of those pubs we mentioned earlier. He uses an example of a pub called the Dog and Bowl.
What happened when it closed?
He notes there was a direct rise in domestic incidents in the area. His argument is that men lost their pressure valves. The pub was a brotherhood space where they could vent and decompress. Without it, the pressure just explodes at home.
It is a really dark picture he is painting of modern society. And in section 4, he gets into how this is maintained through what he calls the language of surrender.
This relies heavily on Orwell's concept that language is power. Riker points out how linguistic engineering is used to demoralize the native population.
He talks about terms like white privilege and decolonization.
Yes, which he argues were imported from American academia and weaponized to shame native Britons.
He gives a really specific example of a 14-year-old boy in Kent,
The boy was sent to a sensitivity session simply for stating that England was built by the English.
which is just a historical fact.
But according to the school, it was problematic. Riker says this is part of a broader agenda of rewriting history. The narrative has completely shifted.
It went from we built schools and hospitals to we stole everything.
Exactly. He cites Bristol University as an example. They scrubbed the phrase British values from their materials and replaced it with shared values. They even labeled Winston Churchill's famous "We shall fight on the beaches" speech as problematic nationalist rhetoric.
That is the speech that rallied the country against the Nazis.
But Riker argues the goal of the cathedral is to erase that pride.
Yeah.
He also points to the Windrush pivot.
Right, the Windrush generation.
They were skilled migrants who came to work and build. But Riker asserts their story has been flipped into a narrative purely about systemic racism in order to justify national guilt.
And he says this language of surrender has completely infiltrated the military as well. He calls it the peacekeeper delusion.
This is one of his most controversial points. He argues the military is now prioritizing diversity workshops on aircraft carriers over actually training to win wars.
He specifically critiques female fighter pilots, right?
He does. He argues from a purely biological standpoint, discussing G-force tolerance. He calls the military's approach a biological denialism fallacy that is actively putting missions at risk for the sake of an inclusion aesthetic.
Again, we are just reporting his arguments here, but he clearly believes the institutions are ignoring biological reality.
Which brings us to his final section. Section 5 is his solution to all of this. He calls it the return of the king.
This is where the book shifts into a sort of red pill wake-up call. It focuses on personal sovereignty.
Riker wants to redefine what a king is for his audience. He says a king is not a tyrant. A king is a steward. And he uses the phrase, the king does not abdicate.
Meaning men need to stop retreating.
Stop apologizing for your strength. Stop apologizing for your ambition or your desire to lead. You have to stand your ground.
He gives very practical advice, too. He talks about building an iron circle.
He hears a great anecdote about a father who was estranged from his son. This man found brotherhood in a spit and sawdust gym in Manchester.
Not a commercial gym, but a gritty, old-school iron gym.
Right. It wasn't about vanity for this man. It was about order and discipline. Riker says rebuilding happens one rep at a time. Men need meaningful spaces with actual stakes and natural hierarchy, not safe spaces.
He also stresses the importance of localism and reclaiming the story.
Narrative warfare. Riker uses the example of the town of Totnes bringing back St. Swithin's Day.
A traditional local festival.
Yeah, and by reviving that local tradition, Riker claims they actually reduced youth unemployment through community pride.
It gives young men something tangible to belong to.
He compares it to the Bayeux Tapestry. He says the tapestry wasn't just art, it was a deliberate framing of history by the victors. Riker argues that men today must take back control of the frame of their own story.
You have to teach your children the history the schools are hiding.
Exactly.
So to wrap up this deep dive, we have covered a massive amount of ground from Riker's book. The Roman withdrawal, the erasure of Alfred the Great, the dad-shaped hole, the capture of the BBC, and the war on boys.
It all builds to his final provocative thought for the reader. He writes, "You do not need permission to lead."
You do not need permission to lead.
Riker's point is that the state is decaying and the institutions are failing. But the family can still stand if the father chooses to stand. That is the essence of stewardship.
Keeping the fire burning through the night.
Exactly. When the institutions fail, it is on the individual man to keep the fire lit.
It is an incredibly intense thesis, and to you, the listener, if this breakdown resonated with you or challenged you, you really need to read the full text. We have only scratched the surface of the historical analysis Riker provides.
You definitely need to read the book to get the full context of his arguments.
So here is our hard call to action for you. Open a new tab right now and go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books. Search for Thousand Year Island Story, Insular Britain's Genetic, Cultural, and Spiritual Integrity by Conrad Riker. Buy the book and read it for yourself.
And Riker has a specific request for his readers. He asks you to leave a 5-star review to act as a signal flare to other men who might be feeling lost in this culture.
A signal flare to let them know they're not alone. And be sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for his ongoing commentary.
It is highly recommended if you want to understand this movement.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with a friend who needs to hear this breakdown. England is waiting. We will see you next time.